That was an example of one of the duets that we'll be playing in this part of the lesson. What we're going to do is switch our emphasis at this point from working on the thumb to working with the right-hand fingers. So the thumb will actually be at rest, will remain planted, and the fingers will be doing all the playing in this section. You'll notice in the duet, there's all the repeated notes with the fingers, which will be actually your part. We're going to introduce 3 new strings, which you've had your fingers resting on, but haven't actually seen the actual notes at this. So the first note is a G note, which is your 3rd string, which is where your I finger had been planted. The next note is your B string, or your 2nd string open. And finally, E, or the 1st string open. Before we go on, I'd like to review a few of the points that I mentioned earlier and maybe go into a bit more detail. As you remember, I said earlier that the right shoulder and right arm should be perfectly relaxed. And if you had your hand planted correctly, you'll notice that there's a slight arch in your wrist. Another common problem that a lot of beginners have is that they bring the wrist down and rest it either on the top of the guitar or just generally too low. There should actually be a feeling almost as if your finger is pivoting, or your hand is pivoting, actually on a pole of some sort. The reason for this is that we can do a little experiment. If you just let your fingers hang relaxed, natural, and pull it back, and then release it, you'll notice that the finger automatically flips back to relaxed resting point, always to the same spot. Now, what we want to do is have that as our beginning point before we make a stroke, before we actually pluck a note. If that isn't our beginning point, for instance, if our finger is at rest at this point, then when our finger returns, we actually have to then make an extra effort and lift it up so that we're ready to play the next note. Now, if we have our wrist too low, what that means is that we have to actually hold our fingers up in the air, because if they were to be relaxed, they would actually rest somewheres on the face of the guitar. So if you simply place your hands, keep your hand relaxed, and place it simply on the strings, like that, without any effort of actually contorting the hand in any sort of way. So that when you do pluck a note, your finger then automatically returns to that same, to resting point just above the note. And then thus the fingers are also relaxed all the time. There's no extra effort necessary to actually lift them and support them. The fingers are always completely at rest. I'd like to demonstrate also the actual stroke that we'll be using. It's called the free stroke, which means that when we pluck the string, the finger simply remains in the air. So if I demonstrate, you'll see that my finger is at rest on the string, again on the left-hand side of the finger, as we mentioned earlier. And I simply pluck, and the finger remains in the air, as you can see. Another very important point to notice is that the main lever is the knuckle. So the rest of the finger is pretty well stable. There's not a lot of bend in any of the other joints. It's actually almost all happening from the knuckle joint. If I exaggerate that a bit, you can see that motion. It's all happening from that joint. What you might find happen, which happens with a lot of beginners, is that that tip joint collapses. You should avoid that and keep it all pretty well solid so that the finger actually isn't flipping. Because then at that point, what that means is that your putting pressure, you start the stroke, and then there's a little bit left over when that finger collapses, then you bring it over. So it's a slightly inefficient way of plucking the string. So if we look at study number 5, this is actually an exercise in developing proper hand position, but also independence of the fingers. So we're going to work from the planted hand position that we had been working with previously when we were using the thumb. In this case, though, the thumb is going to remain planted with the fingers, and we're going to use one finger at a time. So if you look at the first 2 bars of study number 5, you'll notice that it's all 4 G notes, 3rd string open, played all with the I finger. The fingering above the notes indicates the finger, the right-hand fingering, which is going to actually pluck the note. In this case, it says I for the first 3 notes, and in other words, just continue until that changes. So the first bar would be 4 beats, 4 notes, all played with the I finger, with the other 2 fingers remaining planted. So in other words, we'll play the first 2 bars. We'll go 1, 2, 3. Then the next 2 bars are B note, 2nd string open. In this case, the I finger then remains planted, and the M finger plays. 2, 3. And then the next 2 bars are A finger playing the E string, or the 1st string open, with the I and the M fingers remaining planted. In the case of the A finger, the pinky basically just goes along with it. You don't really have to worry about it too much. One thing to keep your eye out on, though, is sometimes a lot of tension develops in there, and you'll find that finger sticking out, or perhaps the opposite problem of pulling it in too tight. So just try to keep that whole side of the hand relaxed, and just let that finger hang, and basically it moves along with the A finger. So let me demonstrate the entire exercise as a whole. So it starts out with the I finger, then M, then A, and then back to M. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see how, as you go from finger to finger, the other 2 then plant themselves on their respective strings. What that does is it creates a habit of a fixed hand position. And also, from that hand position, all the fingers have equal access to the string. Sometimes what may happen is that if you're playing with too much, perhaps of a slant in the hand, the A finger always has to reach for the string. In this case, all the fingers are equally accessible at any time. So it's important that you keep that in mind and always remember, at least with this exercise, to keep those fingers planted. And this particular exercise is the type of exercise that you could, when you begin practicing, you could spend 5 minutes just plucking with each individual finger. You could actually do it as in the study I've indicated, or you could spend a minute or 2 strictly with the I finger, then go to the M finger and the A. You could actually create your own exercise at this point. Again, keep in mind the arch in the wrist, very natural curve. We don't want any angles, any sharp angles. It sort of restricts the tendons. It's a very round hand position. And again, the shoulders relaxed and the arms relaxed.